I've explained that markets rallied as money market interest rates have fallen in the wake of the Hamas attacks on Israel. But that should not diminish the recognition of higher risk from these attacks. Michael Every is a global market strategist for Rabobank with ties in the Middle East. I caught up with him earlier about his concern that all of this could escalate.
The issue then is how many countries get dragged into it. Is it just Israel versus Hamas in Gaza? Or is it Israel and Hamas and Hezbollah in Lebanon? Is it also Israel and Hamas and Hezbollah and Iranian proxies in Syria and in Yemen? Is it also all of them plus potentially Jordan and Egypt being destabilised by this, even if not direct actors? Is it all of that plus Iran? And is it all of that plus maybe America being dragged in, unwillingly at first, on the Israeli side against that potential constellation on the other side? And then you can even ask, what if Russia or potentially even China then decide to back the other side, either overtly or covertly? Now, I don't know where we're going to go from here. I'm not going to pretend I do. Nobody does. But the smartest and deepest thinkers on this region, and let me stress, that's not most people who talk on financial markets. I want to make that abundantly clear. But the smartest and deepest thinkers on this region fear that's where we're headed.
Indeed, we spoke in the past couple of days with the former Australian Treasurer, Joe Hockey, the former ambassador for Australia to Washington. Now, he holds similar deep fears for what takes place here. And of course, he makes the observation that the world might now be split between Russia, Iran, potentially China, certainly those in Hezbollah and Hamas. And this really is, if you like, the US and the Western, if you like, axis against a new and emerging, maybe even organised, sort of an opposition.
I couldn't agree more. I've been arguing the same thing since about 2017, initially to complete consternation and denial from most people. I tried to express that view too. And then, of course, we had the US-China Cold War, which was one step towards that. Then we had the Ukraine war, which has been an enormous accelerant in that direction, and I think has certainly brought many people over to that kind of thinking. If we now have Cold War plus the Ukraine war, which isn't going anywhere, alongside what looks, I fear, to be an escalating broader Middle East war, then yeah, the sides are going to become pretty damn clear, pretty damn fast. And we'll start to see that not only do we have that geographical dividing line, we also have dividing lines within our own very split societies. If I look at what we've seen on the streets in cities like Sydney recently, and of course, and London, Paris, Berlin, and even in New York, we have very divided populations, very divided opinions, and, you know, elite students and opinion makers saying they either wish both sides well or can't tell the difference between a just political cause and a just means of achieving it, which is incredibly morally worrying for the West.
Then go to the economic picture here, because only a week ago in the United States, you effectively had a country headed for some form of economic lockdown because of the debt ceiling and no political agreement until that was done. But it was literally kicking the can down the road. But of course, the US has significant debt right now. The question is, what sort of shape would it be if this does escalate? Because the world really is only just starting to recover from the debt taken on during COVID.
Well, let me be really clear. I'm not the first person to say this, but I've been saying it loudly and clearly for quite some time. We are heading towards, and I hope it isn't, a giant global conflagration. That's not my forecast. But we are heading to the kind of bifurcation that you were talking about earlier. And we're certainly heading for a world where forewarned is forearmed, and you do need to be armed. So we are seeing more and more of a shift towards military spending, national security spending, industrial policy, which requires very heavy subsidies. And in other words, an enormous bill to try and be more resilient in a way that we haven't thought about resilience for far too long. So that's expensive.
Yeah.
But sorry, just to finish, that's expensive, yes. But we're going into it with a post-World War II level of debt. Post-World War II, not pre. So we have a staggering level of debt even before we realise we need to spend like nobody's business to try and defend ourselves.
And then you have the strategic part of Saudi Arabia, which is Iran's sworn enemy, but at the same time, it's suggested that it's seeking peace with the US and with Israel, effectively really may have been the catalyst for the action taken by Hamas in Israel itself.
Absolutely, which is one of the reasons why those who know the region, which again is not most people in financial markets, understand that it's most likely to be Iran behind what Hamas did, even if that's an uncomfortable recognition, because it does automatically therefore escalate it in a way that we don't want to see. Just because it's awkward and uncomfortable doesn't mean it isn't true, regrettably. Now, what Saudi does is interesting, because initially their public comments have appeared to be quite pro-Palestinian, which would be their traditional stance on that. But the UAE next door, the United Arab Emirates, which is kind of, usually under Saudi Arabia's political wing, they've actually made quite pro-Israel statements, and they've got a good relationship going with Israel since they signed their own peace deal with them.
Good to have you on the program, and many thanks for your time today.